Hello, this is one of the series of short vignettes on pragmatism and pragmatic inquiry from an historical point of view. This one is about Abraham Lincoln, who was one of the great leaders, obviously, in our history. And what I was particularly taken by with his work was that when we do pragmatic inquiry, within companies especially, it's usually as an inquiry at a time of great crisis. Otherwise, you don't really take the time to do an inquiry. And one of the key things we always found is that you had to have people stop and reflect. What John Dewey, which I'll talk about in another vignette, talked about reflective thought and objective inquiry. Most of the time, people want to get right into the objective inquiry, and they don't take the time to really stop and think. So I found these words, and it's the opening line of the House Divided speech, which some historians consider the second most important speech that Lincoln made. His most famous, of course, was the Gettysburg Address, but also the second inaugural. But this speech was important. He was running for, he was just nominated for to run for the Senate and against Douglas, and those became, of course, the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. But the first line, there was great crisis going on. The first line was, if we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it. And I had seen that phrase, and I've used this often to show to especially a group of executives who are trying to work ahead on some major problem to say, look, Abraham Lincoln, one of our great leaders, the first line out of his mouth when he was running for the Senate was this idea. I thought it was an if-then, fairly standard, logical comment, and of course that in pragmatism is a form of logic. So, but as time went on, I realized that this is always shown as a very reflective person. But if you ever go to New Salem, down in Illinois, you'll find this statue. And I didn't know this, but Lincoln was a surveyor. And when he left home at 21, finally out of the grip of his tyrannical father, he took on a job, many, but one of them was as a surveyor. And as a surveyor, this was the text that, that they used. It was by Flint, and everybody who studied surveying read this. And Lincoln's sons said this was one of his treasured books, this and Euclid. And it's a system of geometry and trigonometry on the treatise of surveying. And this isn't from Lincoln, but it's if-then statements. And he studied Euclid as a model of logic. And that was his whole basis for arguing a case. It's a much longer story to be told here, but it was fascinating to me to realize that what Lincoln was doing was actually going through a process of stating, as they do, an enunciation, an exposition, specification, construction, proof, and conclusion. But you know the idea. If there are two angles that are equal, then the right angle will be the hypotenuse and all the rest of the stuff that goes on. He studied that diligently, and so that then gave me new meaning to when this appeared in the June 16, 1858 speech, a week later in the New York Tribune, when he was getting national attention. If we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it. We don't have a written script that he actually did in his own hand. We know, though, from other speeches where he would italicize things, so we know that what the newspapers would do is when he would highlight in his own voice, they would pick it up. We're going to talk later about Dewey, is that on continuum of inquiry, we are now far into the 5th year. And so this, we think, is a terrific example of taking the time to do reflective thought within a crisis and a way to actually set it up by testing hypotheses, gaining evidence, and then presenting the conclusion. So that is the story of Abraham Lincoln, much truncated, much to learn from him. But it all comes back to knowing who you are. Thank you.